There are currently over 6 million Asian Americans living in California today. Sacramento County is home to over 280,000 Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islanders. These groups represent a wide array of intersectional identities, including national, ethnic, cultural, socioeconomic, linguistic, religious, and political differences. In other words, we are not a monolith. We are as diverse as the history of the United States, from Chinese miners who came during the gold rush in the 1800s, to Filipino farmers who established Little Manila in Stockton in the 1930s, to Vietnamese and Southeast Asian refugees who built Little Vietnam in South Sacramento since the 1970s. We will hear from Asian American community leaders about their experiences organizing in Sacramento. The rich and powerful landscape of organizing and activism in our region continues to shape our movements and community building efforts.
There were 11 of us children, nine survived, and we started in Nielsen. My dad was a contract laborer. Dad's crew usually were Filipinos, but he also, I remember him picking up a couple of Middle Eastern guys and some Mexicans. Most of the time it was the first wave of Filipino workers that came here were the Manongs. When I was 6, we moved to Galt. It was a very difficult place to live in because of the racism that we faced going to school. We were the only brown people, and it was kind of difficult. Dad and Mom always said, you have to get an education. They said, look, we don't want you to live like this. So when I got to City College, we were just amazed. We started talking about Filipino history and stuff like that, and I thought, I don't know anything about Filipino history, and I'm kind of stupid not thinking what I had lived through was Filipino history. So I met Dick, and we struck up a friendship.
When I got to Sac City, I wasn't really politically developed yet. I was still walking around trying to see where I fit.
We actually founded the Kayumangi, which was the first Filipino club in Sac State. At the same time, that's the ethnic studies was the fledgling program.
As we were able to find out, who we were, it was really eye-opening.
So we were trying to develop a culture on campus. The KDP, which was the Katipunan ng Demokratikong Pilipinos, was a left Filipino organization that was drumming up support and doing education on the anti-Marcos issue in the Philippines, and trying to educate people here about our Filipino-American history.
KDP, as a national organization, did a research on each community and trying to figure out what can we do in this community that would help us do our work, at the same time, bring the community forward. The thing that not everybody knows, if you ever ask anybody in the community, how did the fiesta start? It actually started with KDP, and I think we're at that point where we're just starting to, spark again some of the, people that's becoming a lot more active, and probably been waiting, for the community to start, organizing and trying to meet our needs in the community.
Out of this history also emerges a legacy of mutual aid and solidarity rooted in the shared desire for justice and liberation.
So my story, like a lot of immigrant stories, is a complicated one, but I'm an American by choice, and I also identify as Punjabi. In addition to that, my faith-based community is Sikh. And so there's over 100 years of history of Sikhs in the United States. Like many immigrants, they came to this country for jobs. Where we came from in Punjab had a very similar geography and weather and agriculture in particular to Northern California and the Central Valley. What's true about the Sikh community in the United States is that many of them came in the 1980s or thereafter, when the Indian government was engaged in persecution and genocidal acts against Sikhs. So it is true that almost every Sikh in the United States is either a refugee, directly connected to a refugee, or has some direct familial connection to those folks that have experienced persecution in India. Soon after we immigrated, my father passed away. And in a very real sense, the community raised me, and I learned how important community is, whether it's Desi culture or Sikh or Punjabi. That's the experience which informs everything I do now. 2 Sikh grandfathers were shot and murdered in Elk Grove, and they were truthfully the best among us. Although it's been 10 years now and we haven't found the people responsible, certainly that's a consideration for us, that hate was a factor. But the response inside our community, look, we were devastated. And what became clear very quickly after the murders was that we did not have local infrastructure to respond to that event, and really to a lot of challenges that we might face. We just didn't have the infrastructure. So we invited more elected officials to our Gurdwara, our place of worship, to break bread with us, to listen to the issues that are important to us, and to address the community. We encouraged folks to get involved, to have their children volunteer in civic organizations. For Sikhs, one of our most important tenets is the divinity of all people, that we are all equal. So when we organize as a community, it's essentially meaningless if we are not lifting up our siblings at the same time from other communities. So, when there's a hate crime against the LGBTQ sibling like there was in Davis, the leadership of the West Sacramento Gurdwara said, we need to be there in defense of those people. And that's been really their course of practice, and how they've mentored me is to stand up for others when they are in need, because that's the right thing to do. That's how you build community, and that's how we lift up our own community, is in the defense of others. In our organizing, we realized that we needed ways, 1, to keep their memory alive, 2, to support the family, and 3, to continue to create opportunities where a witness might come forward. So we had door knocks, talking to business owners, putting up signs, we had rallies. But when the issue came up of naming a park in Elk Grove, we recognized that this would be an opportunity where we could serve all 3 of those goals. The name Singh and Kaur Park, we arrived at that name because we wanted to honor not only the 2 grandfathers that were murdered, knowing that every Sikh seeing the name Singh and Kaur would identify with it, and that any member in the community that had ever met a Singh and a Kaur would say, oh yeah, I know a person from that community, let me learn more about this park.
Indeed, the term Asian American itself is a political identity that emerged out of the Yellow Power movement and student protests in the 1960s. In addition to claiming our place in the nation, Asian America represents a shared history of oppression with our Black, Indigenous, Chicanx, and Latinx siblings.
I identify as a transgender, Chinese, Vietnamese, woman of color. One of the things I used to identify as a refugee too, because I am a refugee. Yeah, so we flew into Los Angeles, LAX, and I'll never forget my mother's cries when she saw her son, my oldest brother, for the first time, because he was the first one to leave, and she hadn't seen him in over a decade. And I'll never forget that wailing that she had. That trauma, it does pass down to the kids. Even though I didn't experience the war, I still felt the residue of war. I was a very feminine child. I mean, part of my artistic expression in nature, I also played a lot with dolls, and my parents, they never shunned me or shamed me for it. It wasn't until I entered the American school system that I started to really feel how gendered and binary it really was. I was informed of my queerness and I guess womanness and all of the intersections that I was at in regards to my identity. I was informed by violence and the lack of choices and the messages that I received. I internalized a lot of that for a long, long time. I came out and I was loud and I was proud. And I was trying to find some history. I was trying to find out, well, there must be more of us, right? I went to the gay prides after high school, but they're mostly vendors from just all of these companies that were hip and progressive at that time. And that's what I always understood about Pride. I didn't know that it was a resistance against the state violence that was happening. I didn't know that the first, or historically the first Pride, which was Stonewall, I didn't know that history. My understanding of Pride, at least corporate Pride, was gay Coachella. 2019 was a very pivotal year for us we had to do something. They formed the Still Here coalition, right? Still Here, hearkening back to Miss Major, Griffin Gracie, who was also there at Stonewall, right? And so we formed the Still Here coalition, and we organized, it was a major, big trans march at the Capitol. We wanted to reclaim our history. There were many organizations, many different community, like Latinx community came in. The Black community showed up, Black queer trans community. So many different people showed up. 2019's Pride was, it revealed the great divide between our community, exactly as the corporate state wanted us to, which was that they stole our narrative. And of course, people wanted to celebrate being able to wear rainbow and get on a float and, walk down the street. But Pride is a class issue. Pride is a gender issue. Pride is a race issue. Yeah, these were all the identities that I've learned to be at peace with.
We're relying on the next generation of activists and youth to learn what they've grown up with here in the United States and to apply it to lift up not only the Sikh community, but really all communities, which is consistent with our faith and hopefully how we've raised them.
The struggle will continue, and I think that the struggle for liberation, not just queer liberation, but liberation for all people of color, liberation for all working class people, liberation for women, right? I think there's a lot of hope, without a doubt.
The purpose of this project is to lift up this shared history, as well as the vast hope, joy, and wisdom of Asian American activists in the Sacramento region.